Hello, my name's Glynis and I'm a textile artist. I like to make art using scraps of fabric or upcycling old pieces of material. Today I want to show you how to make one of these. This is a small textile collage framed within an embroidery hoop. Embroidery hoops are a very useful tool for embroidery, but they also make very nice frames. Framing within an embroidery hoop is simple, inexpensive and looks good on the wall. So first of all, I want to tell you what you need for this project. Okay, so you need a piece of scrap paper or a sketchbook to do your design on. You need a pencil, rubber, a black felt tip pen, pins, needles, a pair of scissors, a craft glue stick, some scraps of material, a piece of backing fabric which is 8 inches or 21 centimetres square, an embroidery hoop which is 6 inches or 16 centimetres in diameter, some embroidery thread, and finally a heat erasable pen. Okay, so let's get on. Before we start, I thought I'd make a list of what you need so that you could pause the video and write down everything on the list. Okay, so let's get started. As you can see, my inspiration today is a photo of some poppies. So, first I take a piece of scrap paper and draw around the inner part of the hoop so that I know the area of my design. Okay, flowers are a really good source of inspiration as they allow you to play with lots of different colours and textures, and natural things are very forgiving as I don't have to be super accurate, but you can still tell what they are. As you can see, I'm not making an exact copy of this photo. You can do any flower you want and even just invent your own flower. But I do think that wildflowers such as poppies work well at this size, as the flowers are fairly simple and they often have interesting seed heads that you can add. Poppies are a particular favourite of mine as they have attractive buds and seed heads as well as the colourful flowers. So you don't have to be very realistic and people still recognise what you've done. Okay, so now I'm taking my black felt tip pen and I'm going to go around my flowers so that when I come to transfer my design, I'll be able to see it quite clearly. Okay, so once I've gone over my pencil lines with my black felt tip pen, I put my design away for the minute while I prepare my backing fabric. I take my square of cotton and I'm going to draw around it with an 8 inch or 21 centimetre hoop. If you don't have a hoop this size, that doesn't matter, you can just use something of a similar size such as a plate. Okay, So once I've drawn around that, I'll cut that out, ready to put my design on. But this time, in Blue Peter style, I've got one that I've already cut out earlier. And I'm ready to get my design and place it under my fabric. You can clearly see my design beneath, so I can just transfer my design to the material using my heat erasable fabric pen. I forgot to mention that I make the piece of backing material about 2 inches or 5 centimetres larger than the hoop that I'm going to use, and you'll see why in a moment when you pull your material through your hoop. You do need a bit of excess material around the edge so that you can pull it through effectively. Okay, so now I'm ready to put my design within my hoop. So I take my piece of material and put it over the inner hoop, making sure that my design is nice and centred. Then you take the outer hoop, push that down over the material and do the screw up at the top. Okay, so then I start to pull the material tight all around, very gently pulling so that you don't make the material go out of shape or stretch it, but just pull it gently until you're happy with it being taut in the middle. Then fully do up the screw at the top. Okay, so now I'm ready to start putting on my fabric collage pieces. So gather your bits of fabric that you think will work in your design and play around with fabric combinations. This is a small selection of my fabric stash, and I've already selected some fabric, ribbon and lace and cut them into shapes. And put them in this pot lid that I want to use. Okay, so now I'm going to start placing them on my fabric. I've used a couple of different colours of net, a pink and a red, which I think gives the impression of perhaps the flowers moving slightly in the wind or of flowers behind. As you can see, I don't just use plain fabric. I've got a combination of different fabrics, colours, spots and floral material. I like to take the patterns and colours from one flower to another rather than use completely separate colours for each flower, so that you get a more integrated result. I like to use this multicoloured fabric for the bud because I think it gives the impression of the bud opening. So I'm just finishing off now with some little bits of black lace that I'm using for the middle or the stamens of the poppy, and I think now that's really brought them together. But now I want to show you what you do if you haven't got material of the colour that you need. I've already dyed this piece. Okay, so I'm just putting that to the side for the moment while I show you what you do if you haven't got material in the colour that you want. So I'm just cutting out a little piece of material on some pattern material with a cream background, and I'm going to paint that a sort of browny colour for the poppy seed head. So I'm just going to get a piece of kitchen paper, and I'm going to use just ordinary watercolour paints to paint this. You may be a bit worried about using watercolour paints for this because watercolour does fade in sunlight, but actually you wouldn't want to hang these pieces in strong sunlight anyway because material fades as well. So here you can see it's quite easy to just paint your little piece of material. And now I'm going to just take another piece of material and show you that you can paint it red as well for your poppy if you wanted to. And it comes out quite a vibrant colour, surprisingly effectively. There we go. So as you can see, you get a nice bright red. You can use any type of paint you have for this, whether it's watercolour, poster paint or acrylics, all of those are fine. Okay, so now I've just placed my last piece of material and I'm ready to start gluing. But rather than start right away, I'm going to take a little break and then come back to it later. Okay, so now I'm ready to start gluing with my craft glue stick. But before I do that, I've noticed a few things that I want to adjust a bit. So I thought the central part of this poppy was a bit square. So I'm just cutting off the corners of this lace to make it a more circular shape. And I also noticed that there's a bit of plain ribbon against a bit of plain material. So I'm just swapping those round so that I've got pattern and plains against one another. Just put that back. Before I do start gluing, I would normally take a photo because you do have to move the bits of material round, so it's good to have a record of how you wanted it before you started gluing. And you can see that the way I do it is to pull my piece of fabric over the top of the glue stick rather than try to glue it or glue the background. So I'm just taking all the different parts, and see I've had to take these right off to get to the bit behind, so it's useful to have had a record of how it looked before. You do need to be sure that you're happy with what you've done before you start gluing. You don't want to be picking off glued fabric. Not that I haven't done that myself. It is annoying, but it's not catastrophic. I've also removed stitching if I don't like it and I don't think it works. For example, one of the first designs I did like this, I outlined my flowers with 2 strands of thread. I got it half done and realised it looked too thick and clumsy, so I had to take it all out and started stitching again. I was a bit fed up at the time, but once it's finished and you're happy with it, you forget all those little stumbles on the way. You'll also have noticed that I've got a bit of wet kitchen paper with me, which I use to wipe my fingers every so often, because it is a sticky business and you don't want the bits of fabric to be sticking to your fingers more than the material behind. Okay, so now we're ready to start stitching. So you take your embroidery thread, which comes in strands of 6, and for this you just want a single strand. You only need about 18 inches, any more than that and you're likely to get knots. What you want to do is to catch down each piece of fabric, although you don't need to go around every single piece. You do need to catch it down so that it doesn't fall off at some later date. So here I'm just going to attach my cotton to the back of the fabric. I only use backstitch for these pieces, which most of us have done at some time in our lives, or if not, it's quite simple to learn. You just bring your thread to the front of the fabric, like this, and then you make a single straight stitch about 1/4 inch or 5 millimeters in length. You then come up a space ahead on the same stitch line and then bring your needle back into the same hole at the end of the last stitch, and that's how simple it is. So you just continue on like this until you've fixed down all your pieces and you've embellished your piece as much as you want. This will only take an hour or two to sew. I find this stage very calming and relaxing. You've done all the thinking and just have to follow the lines with your simple stitching. I usually sew while watching telly or listening to music or an audio book. So I've just moved to a comfortable chair and then I'm listening to my audio book while I sew. So I finished doing my sewing, and as you can see, I don't follow the edges of the fabric exactly. I like to sew quite loosely, as I think that gives a more interesting effect. So now we're ready to finish our piece, ready for hanging. You thread a needle with enough thread to go all the way around the circle. Ordinary sewing thread will do. You leave 4 to 6 inch of thread at the end as you start stitching. As you can see, you use large running stitches and work about 1/4 inch from the fabric edge. You sew around the circle of excess embroidery cloth, and when you reach the beginning again, you pull both ends of the thread together, gather the fabric tightly. The edge of the material should fold in to the middle. You then tie the 2 ends of thread together securely with a double knot and finally trim the thread. So now you can just leave the back open and your piece is ready to hang, but I'll also show you one of the various ways of framing in a hoop. This is especially suitable for gifts as it looks more finished and professional than leaving an open back. So you cut out a felt circle the same size as your inner hoop. You can use your design to help you measure. You first insert the needle into the embroidery fabric below the edge that will be visible. You then take your piece of felt and bring your thread through to the front of the felt. You stitch the 2 edges together, checking the alignment of the felt at the edges as you go along. Continue stitching round the edges until you have gone all the way round the hoop and then secure the end. Okay, so here's my finished piece. Before I got to this stage, I took it out of its hoop and ran over the back of it with hot iron to get rid of the pen marks. It's important to do the back, not the front, if you're using net, just in case you melt the net or something. So, as you can see, I've gathered it at the back, and from the front it looks very neat and tidy and ready to hang. But I have got one earlier that I did where I've covered it with the felt, which makes a nice neater result at the back, which you may want to do if you're going to give it away to family or friends. So that's finished. Thank you so much for watching, and I do hope you'll have a go yourself.